from the Digital Media Center on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. Ramping Up Your English is for English language learners from all language backgrounds who have already begun the process of learning English as their second language. It's a program for people of all ages. If you're seeking greater English proficiency, this program is designed to help you reach that goal. Ramping Up Your English is a support program for English learners who have already passed the beginning stages of learning English. We take a content-based approach to helping you reach higher English proficiency. We use English to teach English. The theme of our first unit is Trains and Railroads. This is episode 32, and you're watching segment 1. This is also our last episode on the theme of trains and railroads. We'll move on to the science theme of animals next. Today, we'll take a look at excursion trains, like the skunk train we saw in our previous episode. Now, one of my favorite rail excursions was a train called Tren a las Nubes, and that's Spanish for train to the clouds, in the province of Salta, Argentina. Now, Argentina is the home of the tango, a well-known dance that sprung up to life in the streets of Buenos Aires. Now, Argentina has some natural wonders that will make your jaw drop, like Iguazu Falls, as you see right here. Argentina has its iconic fauna, the alpacas and the llamas. When Argentina, what it has few of is trains. Now, this is an old railroad station in Buenos Aires, and it wasn't very busy when I visited in 1995, and it's even less so now. People in Argentina travel by bus. Now, those buses give travelers some great views of the countryside. While Buenos Aires is a gigantic city, most of the country is rural. Now, there are some lonely stretches that go mile after mile, but a bus is a bus, and I wanted to take the train to the clouds. So while I used buses to get to Salta, I couldn't wait to get on the excursion train that would take me to places even more lonely. We followed this river in the dry season of winter, which is July down there in South America. Only a few braided channels carried water in this wide river. The word describes the best for this is desolate. That came to my mind as I gazed out the window. We're following this river into the Andes Mountains to the border with Chile. Now, you could look back and see the other part of the train, and you can also see how dry this country is this time of year. And talk about dry. Do you see anything green in this image? How about this image? You can see a trestle way off on the left side of the picture, but the landscape still remains pretty bleak at this point. And here we see a little bit more. We see a closer up look of a trestle, and this is one of the same rail line that we passed the trestle on later in the train. Here we see a little bit of green, but you notice that there's some animals out there, and you'll notice there's some white strips out there. That's salt, and a lot of this area is called salt. There's a word like sal, salinas. These are the salinas, because sal is the Spanish word for salt. We finally did find something other than just bare landscape, but not all that welcoming. This is a mine where they mine something, probably copper up in this area. We arrived at some civilization because these people came from over the mountains, and they had things to sell us on the train. In the next image, you'll see where they come right up to the train and would exchange the goods for the money right out the window of the train. I should mention that the train is not moving and that everyone moved away, safely away from the train when we went a little bit farther. Now here you see this bridge, this last trestle up there. If you want to sense a scale, look over to the left in the river part, the dry river. You'll see a car there to give you some idea of just how big this whole area is. And this is on that trestle looking down into that river. And here we see, looking down, if you look closely, you see the shadow of the trestle, but also the train. You can see a little gap between each of the cars of the train. And if you look carefully under that shadow, you see that car that we saw before, which gave us a sense of scale. And here I am standing on the trestle. And as you can see, I have a pretty heavy coat on. Now, out in the sunlight, it was pretty warm. We're up at a very high elevation, but it's almost like two different temperatures. Where the sun was shining on my face, I started getting a little warm in the coat. But on my other side, where it's in the shadow, I was actually still pretty cold. So there's very thin air up here. In fact, the air is so thin at this elevation that the train, which will stay on this image for a while, the train actually had doctors on it with bottles of oxygen. As we got higher and higher in elevation, more and more passengers were stopping by this bottle of oxygen, putting a mask on their face and getting a little extra hit of oxygen to make up for the thin atmosphere. Now, I was offered a bitter kind of leaf to chew on, and it didn't taste very good, but they say that it helps you absorb more oxygen from the air, and it must have been true because I didn't have to take any oxygen from there. Let's go on to the next image, and we will see that we have actually, the engine, the locomotive of the train has actually gone to the end of the train. That's what you're looking at now, and we all just turned our seats around to face the other direction. So now we have more to tell you about, and so I'm just waiting to tell you that from this part on, we were headed backward, in other words, back into Salta. And so, ready for some air with some higher oxygen content, I saw the train's engine attach itself to the rear, as I mentioned, of the train, and passengers all turned their seats around to face forward. It was a full and exciting day, and we ended our ride in the dark back in Salta. And while I chewed that leaf that was said to help with the thin air, as I said, I never had to take oxygen from the tank like several passengers. There was never a cloud in the sky that day, yet I can honestly say that I had ridden the Tren a las Nubes, the train to the stars. And not every train takes you where the oxygen is thin, but many go through scenery that will take your breath away. One of those is the Cumbres and Toltec Railroad in New Mexico and Colorado. We'll share some scenes from that trip later in this program. So we'll be right back right after this. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. If your English proficiency is nudging into the advanced level, you might be able to appreciate this high-quality book from National Geographic. It's entitled World's Great Train Journeys. As the title suggests, readers will learn about passenger trains in countries outside of the United States. One chapter I especially enjoyed was the one about the train through Mexico's Copper Canyon. I should warn you, though, reading this book might lengthen your bucket list. Reading is the most effective way to build vocabulary for intermediate language learners. Reading World's Great Train Journeys would be an exciting yet challenging experience for English learners. If nothing else, you'll enjoy the beautiful photographs. For Ramping Up Your English, I'm John Letts.